My name is Clara, and I'm 32. My parents demanded I cancel my 5th wedding anniversary trip to babysit for my sister. When I refused, they cornered me in my own home. But they made one mistake: my sister left her purse behind, and what my husband found inside made him scream. If you're watching this from somewhere where family can sometimes get complicated, let me know where you're from in the comments. And before I tell you about the decision that changed everything, hit that like and subscribe button to hear more real-life stories about setting boundaries and finding your own strength. My life, to an outsider, looked peaceful. I'm a graphic novelist. I work from home in a small, sun-drenched studio that overlooks our backyard garden, where my husband, Mark, grows heirloom tomatoes and fragrant herbs. The smell of basil and fresh soil often drifts through the open window while I work, a constant, calming presence. We've been married for almost 5 years, and he's my rock. Mark is a middle school history teacher, a man whose patience seems infinite, whose kindness is a quiet, steady force. He believed in my work long before I did, back when I was just a nervous art student with a portfolio of sketches and a mountain of self-doubt. He's the first one to read my drafts, tracing the panels with his finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. He's the one who brings me coffee, rich and dark, on nights when I'm pushing a deadline, never once complaining about the late hours. And he's the one who constantly reminds me that my art, my stories, have value. Thanks to my freelance work and increasingly larger publishing contracts, I'd been fortunate enough to become our family's main earner. It wasn't something we talked about much, but it was a quiet fact that shaped our life. It allowed us to buy our small but cozy house in a neighborhood with old oak trees, to pay it off early, and to live a comfortable, if not extravagant, life. It was a life I was proud of, one I had built with my own 2 hands, panel by panel, page by page. But within my own family, the narrative was completely different. To my parents, Richard and Linda, I was always the stable but boring child. My sister, Diana, 3 years my senior, was the star. Diana was a mom-fluencer. Her Instagram was a perfectly curated, pastel-hued fantasy. It featured her 2 beautiful children, Brayden and Madison, in coordinating linen outfits, eating artfully arranged organic snacks on rustic farmhouse tables. Her home looked like a magazine spread, all white shiplap and strategically placed fiddle-leaf figs. She had 50,000 followers who flooded her comments with adoration. "Mom goals. You're an inspiration. How do you do it all?" The truth was, Diana didn't do it all. My parents did. They were the silent investors, the uncredited executive producers of Diana's brand. They'd paid the down payment on her bigger house in the trendier suburb. They made the payments on the gleaming white SUV she drove, the one she called her mom mobile in sponsored posts. And they regularly gave her loans, large, interest-free sums that were never discussed again to fund her picture-perfect Instagram lifestyle. My work, meanwhile, was treated as a cute hobby. "It's so nice that you have something to keep you busy while Mark is at work," my mother would often say with a patronizing pat on my hand, completely ignoring the fact that my something was the reason we were financially secure. This injustice wasn't new. It was the bedrock of our relationship, a foundation of favoritism laid down in early childhood. I remember my 16th birthday with a clarity that still stings. I had asked for one thing: a Wacom graphics tablet. It was an expensive piece of professional equipment, one I had researched for months, dreaming of the digital worlds I could create. It was the key to my future, the tool I needed to build a portfolio for art school. My parents said it was too much of an extravagance, an unnecessary luxury. Instead, for her 19th birthday a month later, they bought Diana a used convertible. "She needs it for work, Clara," my father had explained, his tone leaving no room for argument. Though Diana's work was a part-time retail job at a boutique a 10-minute walk from their house. I got a set of nice but ordinary paintbrushes and a vague promise that they'd reconsider the tablet someday. Someday never came. I worked every weekend and all summer at a local ice cream parlor, my hands aching and sticky until I had saved enough to buy that tablet myself. The day I brought it home, my mother glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before asking if I could help her plan a surprise party for Diana. The pattern continued relentlessly. When I graduated from art school with honors, my parents came to the ceremony. I can still picture them, sitting in the third row, my father checking his watch. They clapped politely when my name was called, but they left before the reception, before I even had a chance to introduce them to my favorite professor. "Diana just called. She's having a little car trouble," my mother whispered to me, giving me a quick, distracted hug that smelled of hairspray. The trouble, I found out later, was that Diana had forgotten to get gas again. They missed my celebratory dinner, a milestone I had worked towards for 4 grueling years, to drive 45 minutes with a can of gasoline for her. I celebrated with Mark and a few friends, trying to ignore the hollow space at the table where my family should have been. Even planning my wedding was an exercise in frustration. My parents had offered to contribute a modest amount, but every decision was met with a comparison to Diana, who wasn't even engaged. "When Diana gets married," my mother would say, "she'll want a much bigger venue." They vetoed my choice of a simple, rustic barn, pushing for a stuffy country club because it was where Diana would someday want her reception. In the end, Mark and I paid for the entire wedding ourselves, just to have a day that felt like our own. So, when we started planning our 5th wedding anniversary trip, we decided to keep it quiet. This was a big one for us, 10 days in Italy. A dream we had been saving for 3 years, tucking away small amounts from every paycheck. We had a jar on our kitchen counter labeled Florence Fund. We had booked the flights, reserved a small apartment with a balcony overlooking a quiet Florentine street, and even signed up for a cooking class in the Tuscan countryside. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a celebration of our partnership, of everything we had built together, quietly and steadily. It was ours, and ours alone. I didn't want it tainted by one of Diana's manufactured crises or diminished by my parents' dismissive comments. Our plan was to tell them a week before we left, presenting it as a non-negotiable fact. It seemed foolproof. I thought I could handle anything, as long as I had this one perfect thing to look forward to. But I had no idea that my family's next move would be a direct assault on the only sanctuary I had ever known. As it so often did, through a telephone line, severing the peace of an ordinary Tuesday evening. It was about a month before our trip. I was in my studio, the scent of evening rain and damp earth wafting through the window. The satisfying scratch of my stylus on the tablet was the only sound. I was in the zone, deep in the world I was creating, a world where I had complete control. Then my phone buzzed, shattering the quiet with my mother's familiar ringtone. I hesitated, tempted to ignore it, but the ingrained habit of a lifetime, the need to be the responsible one, took over. I answered. "Clara, sweetie," she began, her voice a cascade of artificial cheerfulness. It was her "I'm about to ask for something" voice, a tone so bright and brittle it could crack. "What are you up to?" "I'm working, Mom," I said, setting my stylus down and rubbing my tired eyes. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing big. I just have the most wonderful news to share. You're not going to believe it. Diana just got the most incredible opportunity." Her voice was practically bursting with a pride she never used for me. "A high-end baby gear brand, you know, the kind all the celebrities use, wants to sponsor her a trip to an influencer conference in California. They're paying for everything. This could be her big break." I felt a small, cold knot form in my stomach, the kind of dread that is both vague and specific at the same time. "Wow, that's great," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I tried to force a note of enthusiasm. "When is it?" "That's the amazing part. It's next month, from the 12th to the 22nd. The world tilted. I stopped breathing. The dates hung in the air, sharp and menacing. The 12th to the 22nd. Our exact dates. Our flight to Rome left on the evening of the 12th. Our return flight was on the 22nd. It was too precise. It couldn't be a coincidence. My mind raced, trying to remember if I had mentioned the dates to anyone, if I had written them on a calendar she might have seen. "Mom," I said slowly, carefully, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Those are the dates that—" She cut me off, her cheerful bulldozer of a voice flattening my protest. I know, it's such short notice. And the only problem, of course, is that she can't take Braden and Madison. Her husband, Kevin, has to work and can't get the time off. So I told her not to worry, that their wonderful Aunt Clara would be more than happy to watch them. "You're home all day anyway." You're home all day anyway. The phrase landed like a punch. The casual, complete dismissal of my life, my career, my time, as if my being at home meant my time was a public utility, available for my family to tap into whenever they pleased. There was no question, no consideration, just the calm, unshakable assumption that my life would, and should, bend to accommodate my sisters. "Mom, I can't," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Mark and I have plans for those dates." A glacial pause stretched across the line. The forced cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a familiar, icy disappointment. "What plans? You're not going anywhere." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as she saw it. "Actually, we are. We're going to Italy. It's our 5th wedding anniversary trip. We've been planning it for years. I was going to tell everyone next week." A heavy, theatrical sigh came through the phone. "Clara, honestly, don't be selfish. This is your sister's career. A vacation can be rescheduled. An opportunity like this can't. You know how hard she's worked." Hard work. I had to physically bite my tongue to stop a bitter laugh from escaping. I was the one staring at a screen for 10 hours a day, my wrist aching, my brain fried from weaving intricate narratives. Diana worked by posting a picture of her son eating a designer popsicle with a caption full of hashtags. "It's our anniversary, Mom. It's our 5th. It's important to us," I insisted, my voice pleading now. "Family is more important," she shot back, the words a well-worn weapon. "And right now, your sister needs her family. I'm going to tell her you'll think about it. Do the right thing, Clara." Click. She hung up. She didn't wait for a reply. I sat there in the sudden silence of my studio, the half-finished drawing on my screen mocking me with its bold lines and confident hero. I felt anything but. Mark came home an hour later to find me in the exact same spot, staring blankly at the wall. He took one look at my face, set his briefcase down, and said, "Your mom called." I just nodded. I relayed the entire conversation, my voice flat and emotionless. He listened patiently, his jaw tightening as I spoke. When I was finished, he didn't hesitate. "No," he said simply. The word was a rock. "The answer is no. We are not canceling our trip." "I know," I sighed, a wave of relief washing over me, followed immediately by another wave of anxiety. "But you know they won't let it go. This is just the beginning." He was right, of course. My mother had planted the seed. Now she would step back and let my father and Diana tend to it, nurturing it with logic and guilt until it grew into a thorny problem that would ensnare me completely. The assault was coming, and I knew I was standing right in its path. My prediction came true with nauseating speed. The following days were a carefully orchestrated assault on my resolve, a three-pronged pressure campaign designed to isolate, guilt, and exhaust me into submission. It was a masterclass in my family's unique brand of emotional warfare. The first front was opened by Diana. She was too clever to call and risk a direct confrontation. Instead, she waged her war via text message, a medium that allowed her to craft each passive-aggressive missile with precision. The first one arrived while I was drinking my morning coffee. It was a picture of my niece and nephew, Braden and Madison, smiling angelically in their pajamas. The text read, "Morning. Just thinking about how much these two love their Aunt Clara, they'd be so devastated if my trip fell through. I'm just trying to build a future for them, you know? I stared at the message, my stomach churning. It was a perfect Diana text. A guilt trip wrapped in a compliment, using her children as a shield. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, another one arrived. This time, it was a screenshot of an article titled, "The Power of Sibling Support in Women's Careers." Below it, her message. "Thought of you when I read this. It's so important for women to lift each other up." The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost breathtaking. I was supposed to lift her up by demolishing my own long-awaited celebration. Mark saw me staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, ready to type out a furious reply. "Don't," he said gently, putting his hand over mine. "That's what she wants. She wants to draw you into an argument so she can play the victim. You don't owe her an explanation. Your no was a complete sentence." I put the phone down, but her words echoed in my head all day. The second front was opened by my father that evening. He called just as we were sitting down to dinner, deploying his signature weapon, the voice of reason. It was the calm, condescending tone he used when he believed I was being hysterical and needed a man to explain things logically. "Clara," he began, dispensing with pleasantries, "your mother told me about your reluctance to help your sister. I've taken the liberty of looking into it, and there's a simple, logical solution here. The financial loss of changing your flights and accommodations would be minimal, maybe a few $100s. I'm willing to cover that for you." He presented it as a generous offer, but I knew what it was. A transaction. He was trying to buy my compliance. "Dad, it's not about the money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's the principle. It's our anniversary. We've been looking forward to this for years." He sighed, a sound of pure, paternalistic frustration. "Let's look at this like a family balance sheet, shall we? On one side, you have your vacation, an emotional want. On the other, you have a tangible career opportunity for Diana that could elevate her financial standing, which in turn benefits the entire family. The logical choice is clear. You need to stop thinking with your heart and start thinking with your head. Don't let sentimentality cloud a practical decision." A family balance sheet. He had reduced my marriage, my joy, my one special trip into an emotional want on a spreadsheet. The coldness of it was staggering. "This isn't a business, Dad. It's my life," I repeated, my voice cracking this time. "That's exactly the kind of emotional response I'm talking about," he said, his tone final. "Think it over. You'll see, I'm right." He hung up. I sat there, looking at my plate of cooling food, feeling like I was 10 years old again, being told my dreams were impractical. The final, and most devastating, push came from my mother 2 days later. She had regrouped, and now came armed with her most potent weapon, emotional blackmail. The fake cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a voice thick with a carefully rehearsed wounded tone. "I just don't know where we went wrong raising you, Clara," she began, the opening salvo in a guilt-fueled tirade. "I raised you girls to be there for each other, to be a family. Your sister is beside herself. She called me sobbing last night. She said she feels like you're actively rooting against her, that you're jealous of her success." "Jealous?" The accusation was so absurd it left me breathless. "Mom, I paid for the entire family's beach vacation last year because you said you couldn't afford it. I loaned you $15,000 for the roof repair, money I never expect to see again. I have done nothing but support Diana and her family. How can you, of all people, accuse me of being jealous?" "Money isn't everything, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with sanctimony. "Sometimes support means sacrifice, and you're refusing to make one. This isn't just about a trip anymore. This is about the kind of person you are. Your sister will never forget this. If you choose this vacation over her, you will be creating a rift in this family that may never heal. Is that what you want?" She was framing it as my choice, my fault. My refusal to be a doormat was being painted as an act of familial destruction. That night, I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I just sat on the couch, the weight of their combined disappointment pressing down on me. It was then that my best friend, Sarah, called. She was a lawyer, sharp and no nonsense, and she could read my mood in the first 2 seconds of my hello. I told her everything. I expected sympathy, but what I got was cold, hard clarity. "Clara, listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "This is not a negotiation. This is a hostage situation, and your anniversary is the hostage. They are a united front of manipulators. Your dad uses logic, your mom uses guilt, and your sister uses victimhood. It's a textbook dysfunctional system. You have every right to say no, and you don't have to justify it." Hearing it from an outsider, someone not tangled in our web of history and obligation, was like a splash of cold water. She was right. They weren't trying to find a solution. They were trying to force a capitulation. Buoyed by Sarah's validation, I felt a flicker of my old strength return. I sent a final group text to my parents and Diana that evening. It was simple, direct, and left no room for interpretation. "I'm writing to confirm one last time. My decision is final. Mark and I will not be canceling our anniversary trip. I cannot watch the kids from the 12th to the 22nd. I will not be discussing this further." I turned my phone off immediately after sending it. I needed a reprieve from the onslaught. I thought my final, unambiguous statement would be the end of it. I thought that, faced with a solid brick wall, they would finally have to turn around and find another path. But I had underestimated their sense of entitlement. They weren't going to go around the wall. They were preparing to blow right through it. The silence that followed my final text message lasted for exactly 24 hours. It was a heavy, unnerving quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a tornado. Part of me, the naive, hopeful part that I could never seem to fully extinguish, tried to believe they had finally accepted my decision. I imagined them reluctantly calling another sitter, or perhaps Diana's husband, Kevin, miraculously getting the time off work. But the larger, more realistic part of me knew this was just the eye of the storm. They were regrouping. They were planning their next move. The last straw came not as a phone call or a text, but as a direct, physical invasion. It was a Friday afternoon. Mark was on his way home from school, and I was in my studio, trying desperately to lose myself in my work, but the tension in the air was too thick to ignore. Then the doorbell rang. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. My parents were on my porch, their expressions grim and resolute, like generals before a final charge. And standing between them was Diana. She was holding Madison on her hip and Braden by the hand, their small, innocent faces looking up at my door. They had brought the children. They had brought their human shields. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. I opened it just a crack. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice a low command. He pushed the door open and strode into my hallway as if he owned the place. My mother and Diana followed, a phalanx of entitlement. "Clara! Aunt Clara!" Braden yelled, a joyful, innocent sound in the midst of this invasion. He ran and wrapped his arms around my legs. I automatically bent down and hugged him, burying my face in his soft hair, my heart constricting with a painful mix of love and rage. I loved these children so much, and my family knew it. They were weaponizing that love with surgical precision. "Sweeties, why don't you go into the living room and watch some cartoons?" Diana cooed to her kids, her voice a syrupy, sweet poison. "Aunt Clara and the grandparents need to have a little chat with Mommy." Once the children were out of sight, their attention captured by the television, the three of them turned to face me. The hallway suddenly felt small and suffocating. "We are not accepting no for an answer, Clara," my father began, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture of unshakable authority. "We have discussed this as a family, and we have come to a decision." "A decision?" I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "This isn't a democracy. This isn't a family vote. This is my life, my marriage, my anniversary." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," my mother scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "This is what is going to happen. You will watch the children. Diana will go on her business trip. You and Mark can take your little vacation some other time, maybe in the fall when the rates are cheaper. It is settled." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it left me breathless. They weren't just ignoring me. They were overruling me. They were standing in the home I paid for, dictating the terms of my life as if I were a rebellious teenager. "No," I said. The word came out quiet, but it felt solid, heavy. I said no. The answer is still no. It was Diana who finally snapped. She stepped forward, her perfectly made-up face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Don't you get it? This isn't some stupid little holiday. This is my big shot. Why are you always so unbelievably selfish? You just sit at home and doodle all day. What is so damn important about your life that you can't sacrifice 10 miserable days for your own family?" Doodle. That one word. It was meant to gut me, and it did. My entire career, the years of training, the 12-hour workdays, the passion, the sweat, the soul I poured onto every page, all of it reduced to a child's idle pastime. My doodling paid for the new roof over your heads. I shot back, the fury finally breaking through my carefully constructed calm. "From the $15,000 loan I gave you, the loan you then used to give Diana $10,000 so she could buy new furniture for her perfect Instagram pictures." Oh, a stunned, ringing silence filled the hallway. My parents' faces turned a mottled shade of red. Diana looked as if I'd slapped her, not because I was wrong, but because I had dared to speak the unspeakable truth out loud. It was my father who recovered first. He took a step towards me, his body language menacing. His voice was low, each word laced with ice. "Listen here, young lady. You've had it too easy. You don't understand real-world responsibility. Diana is building something tangible. Her future is on the line. Your sad little vacation is a frivolous expense. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the people who actually matter." The people who actually matter. The words landed not like a punch, but like a verdict. A final damning judgment on my place in their world. I wasn't one of them. I was a utility, a resource, a supporting character whose only role was to ensure the star of the show had everything she needed to shine. In that instant, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The anger, the hurt, the desperate need for their approval, it all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. They would never change. They would never see me. They would never respect me. It was a truth as solid and unforgiving as the floor beneath my feet. I looked him straight in the eye. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I understand now." They mistook my calm for capitulation. I saw the tension leave my mother's shoulders. I saw the triumphant smirk begin to form on Diana's lips. Believing they had won, they turned to leave. In her haste and arrogance, Diana grabbed her coat, chattering about the packing she still had to do. But in her moment of victory, she made a fatal error. She forgot one crucial thing. Her designer purse, left behind on the armchair by the door. That single, careless act of negligence would unravel everything. They left in a palpable cloud of self-satisfaction. The click of the front door shutting echoed in the hallway, sealing a heavy, suffocating silence into the house. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, replaying my father's words in my head. The people who actually matter. The phrase was a verdict that had finally set me free. The hollowed-out feeling was gone, replaced by a strange, icy calm. The fight was over because I was no longer fighting for their approval. I was done. Mark came home about 10 minutes later, whistling as he walked in. He stopped short when he saw my face. His smile vanished. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes immediately scanning the room. They landed on the purse. It was a large, expensive-looking tote, a brand I knew I couldn't afford, sitting incongruously on our modest armchair. "Is that Diana's?" I couldn't form words. I just gave a single, sharp nod. He dropped his briefcase and came to my side, his hands gently gripping my arms. "They were here," he said, his voice flat and hard. It wasn't a question. "They brought the kids." I nodded again, and that small movement broke the dam. A single tear traced a hot path down my cheek. I told him everything. I recounted the entire ambush, my voice a dull monotone as I repeated their words, their arguments, their ultimate dismissal of my life. I finished with my father's final, brutal pronouncement. Mark pulled me into a fierce hug, his arms a fortress around me as my body finally started to shake with silent, ragged sobs. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with anger. "I am so sorry they did this to you." After a few minutes, when my tears subsided, he gently let me go. His gaze fell on the purse again. "She left it," he said, a curious note in his voice. He walked over to it and picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. "We should call her," I said, my voice weak. The old, responsible Clara was still trying to do the right thing. "Tell her to come and get it." "In a minute," Mark said. His eyes had narrowed. He was looking at something peeking out from the unzipped top of the bag. It was the corner of a bright, pink, leather-bound journal. Acting on an impulse I could see was too strong to resist, he pulled the zipper open the rest of the way. "Mark, don't!" I protested, but there was no conviction in my voice. A dark, ugly part of me wanted to know. I needed to see the truth, no matter how painful. He didn't rummage through it. He just looked at the contents nestled on top. There was a thick planner, a designer wallet that probably cost more than our monthly grocery bill, and a stack of papers held together with a paperclip. Mark lifted the papers out. The cover page was printed in a cheerful, looping font. It read, "Napa Valley Couples Retreat Itinerary." Our eyes met across the room. A silent, sickening understanding passed between us. Without a word, he flipped to the next page. It was a reservation confirmation from a 5-star luxury spa and resort in Napa. Under the guest names field, it clearly listed Diana and Kevin Miller. And the dates? The 12th through the 22nd. The exact dates of her so-called business trip. At the bottom of the page was the total cost for their stay, a number so astronomical it made me physically dizzy. $8,000. "The influencer conference," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. "The all-expenses-paid sponsored trip," Mark said, his voice dripping with pure contempt. He continued to flip through the pages. The itinerary was a fantasy of indulgence. Private wine tastings at exclusive vineyards, a couple's deep-tissue massage session, reservations at 3 different Michelin-starred restaurants. There was not one single mention of a conference, a seminar, a brand meeting, or anything remotely related to work. It was all a lie. A breathtakingly audacious, meticulously constructed lie. They hadn't just asked me to cancel our anniversary. They had tried to manipulate me into sacrificing our dream trip, the one we had saved for years, so I could provide free childcare while they went on the vacation of a lifetime. The anger I'd felt earlier was a flickering candle compared to the inferno of cold rage now consuming me. And then Mark saw the pink journal. He picked it up. "Don't," I said again, more seriously this time. "That's her diary. It's private." End of. Privacy was a luxury they gave up when they cornered you in your own home and tried to dismantle your marriage. Mark shot back, his voice like flint, and he opened it. He scanned one page, then another, his expression shifting rapidly from anger to disbelief, and then to something much darker. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. And then he screamed. It wasn't a loud, piercing scream. It was a strangled, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated rage that was somehow more frightening. What? He yelled, the word ripping from his throat. What is it? What does it say? I demanded, rushing to his side, my heart pounding against my ribs. He didn't speak. He just held the journal out to me, his fingers shaking as he pointed to a specific entry. I took it, my own hands trembling, and I read Diana's neat, looping handwriting. September 15th. Mom and Dad finally agreed to loan me the $10 for the Napa trip. They think it's for the business, which is hilarious. I just said I needed it for an equipment upgrade. They pulled the money from the loan they got from Clara. That naive girl probably still thinks she's getting that money back. So gullible. She owes us, anyway. Her job is just doodling, while I have to actually work to maintain my image. The least she can do is watch the kids. Mark and her can take their sad little vacation some other time. The room tilted violently. The words swam before my eyes. Sad little vacation. Naive girl. Gullible. Doodling. It was all there. The complete and utter contempt she held for me. For my life. For my marriage. It wasn't just a moment of frustration. It was a calculated, long-held disdain. The hollow feeling inside me was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard certainty. The rage was gone too, replaced by something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Resolve. Mark and I looked at each other. The same thought was reflected in our eyes. We didn't need to say a word. This was no longer about defending our vacation. This was about reclaiming my life. "We are not calling her," Mark said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We are keeping this. We are going to photograph every single page." "And then?" I asked, my voice just as steady. "And then," he said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face, "we're going to invite them over for one last family meeting. A meeting they will never, ever forget." The plan began to form, not in words, but in a shared, silent understanding. We would not yell. We would not accuse. We would let her own words, her own arrogance, be her downfall. The hunter was about to become the prey. We waited 2 days. Those 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled fury. There was no shouting, no crying. Instead, our home was filled with a quiet, methodical purpose. It was the calm of soldiers preparing for a battle they knew. With absolute certainty, they were going to win. Mark, ever the historian, treated the evidence like a precious archive. He set up a makeshift photography station on our dining room table, using his best camera to capture high-resolution images of every single page of Diana's planner and journal. The vibrant pink leather of the journal seemed to mock us from under the bright lights. We printed out pristine copies of the Napa itinerary, the spa reservations, and, most importantly, the key, damning journal entries. We slipped them into a plain manila envelope. The weapon was ready. On Sunday morning, with our hearts pounding a steady, determined rhythm, I picked up my phone and composed a new group text. The words were carefully chosen, the tone deceptively conciliatory. It was the perfect bait. "Hi, everyone. Mark and I have been doing a lot of thinking since Friday. I want to talk about the babysitting situation. Can you all come over this afternoon around 3? I think we can work something out." The hook was in the water. They bit almost instantly. My mother's reply was a gushing torrent of relieved praise. "Oh, Clara, sweetie, I knew you would do the right thing. I'm so proud of you for putting family first. We'll be there. Can't wait." "Oh," Diana's was dripping with smug condescension. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it? Glad you finally came to your senses. See you at 3. My father, a man of few words when he believed he had already won, simply sent a thumbs-up emoji. They were walking into a triumph, or so they thought. They envisioned my tearful apology, my reluctant agreement, their ultimate victory. They were about to walk into an intervention, and they were the subjects. At 3 p.m. on the dot, the doorbell rang. Mark and I were seated, side by side on our sofa. We were a united front. On the coffee table in front of us, we had placed just one object, centered perfectly like a piece of modern art. Diana's purse. I opened the door. The three of them stood there, wreathed in self-satisfaction. Diana had a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Hello, sweetie," my mother chirped, moving in for a hug. I held up a hand, a small, simple gesture that stopped her in her tracks. "Hello, Mom. Please, come in and have a seat." Her smile faltered, confused by my cool tone, but she complied, herding my father and Diana into the living room. They settled into the two armchairs facing us, a tangible sense of expectation in the air. "So," Diana began, crossing her legs and examining her perfectly manicured nails, "you're ready to admit you were being ridiculous? I'm prepared to accept your apology now." I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long before I spoke, my voice calm and measured. "Before we get to that," I said, "I believe you left something here on Friday, Diana." I nodded towards the purse on the table. Diana's eyes widened in feigned surprise. "Oh my God! My purse! I've been looking everywhere for that. I was sure I'd left it at the mall." She started to rise, reaching for it, but Mark placed a firm hand on top of the bag. "Sit down, Diana," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a core of steel that made her sink back into her chair. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face for the first time. "We wanted to keep it safe for you," I continued, my eyes locked on hers. "But it was unzipped, and we were concerned something important might have fallen out. So, we took a look inside to make sure everything was there." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew thick and heavy. I could see the color draining from Diana's face, leaving her foundation looking chalky. My mother glanced from me to Mark, a frown of confusion on her face. "We found some very illuminating things," Mark said. He reached for the manila envelope, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled out the first document and placed it on the coffee table, turning it so they could all read it. It was the Napa Valley itinerary. Your business trip, for instance. It looks a lot more like a 5-star couples retreat than an influencer conference. My father leaned forward, squinting at the paper. "What in the world is this?" "Diana lied to you," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. I refused to look at my parents. My focus was entirely on my sister. There is no business trip. There is no sponsor. She and Kevin were planning a lavish vacation for themselves, and they expected us to sacrifice our anniversary to provide them with free childcare. End close. "That's not true," Diana stammered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. The networking. It happens at the spa." "Really?" Mark said, his voice laced with sarcasm. He produced the second document, a copy of the first journal entry, and placed it beside the itinerary. "Then maybe you can explain this." He began to read aloud, his voice clear and condemning. "Mom and Dad finally agreed to loan me the $10 for the Napa trip. They think it's for the business, which is hilarious." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. My father stared at Diana, his face a mask of dawning horror. Mark wasn't finished. He continued reading. "They pulled the money from the loan they got from Clara. That naive girl probably still thinks she's getting that money back. So gullible." I finally turned my gaze to my parents. "The $15,000 loan I gave you for the roof last year. The one you swore you'd pay back as soon as your investments matured." We were going to," my father sputtered, his eyes unable to meet mine. "Were you?" I asked quietly. "Or was that just a lie to get money from your gullible daughter so you could fund Diana's spa days?" Their ashamed silence was all the confession I needed. Finally, I reached into the envelope and took out the last copy. It was the entry that had broken me. I looked at Diana, who was now slumped in her chair, staring at her hands, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. "And this," I said, my voice shaking slightly with the force of my contained fury. "This is the part that I will never forget." I read the words aloud, each one a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. She owes us anyway. Her job is just doodling. while I have to actually work to maintain my image. The least she can do is watch the kids. Mark and her can take their sad little vacation some other time. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of complete and utter ruin. The ugly, twisted truth of their dynamic lay exposed and rotting in the center of my living room. Our sad little vacation, I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. Is that what you think of us? Of our life? That we are just naive props in your perfect, curated world? Diana didn't answer. She just sobbed, pathetic, self-pitying sobs. And you two? I said, turning to my parents. You enabled this. You lied to me. You took my money and gave it to her. You pressured me. You guilt-tripped me. You insulted my life's work, all to feed the ego of your golden child. We didn't know, sweetie, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. We didn't know she was lying about the trip. Maybe not, I conceded, but that doesn't even matter. What matters is that you were willing to sacrifice my happiness for hers without a second thought. You stood in my hallway and told me I wasn't one of the people who actually matter. Finally, I rose to my feet. The movement was a signal. The trial was over. This family meeting is concluded. And here is the verdict. Mark and I are going to Italy. We are leaving on Tuesday, 2 days early, and we are going to have the time of our lives. When we get back, everything will be different. Oh? I looked at each of them, my gaze hard and unflinching. Diana, I am done with you. For now, maybe forever. You need to grow up. Don't call me. Don't text me. Mom, Dad, I need space. A lot of it. I will contact you if and when I am ready. And that $15,000? Consider it severance pay. The price of my freedom from this toxic charade. Now, I need all of you to get out of my house. They rose like zombies, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and utter defeat. Diana wouldn't look at me. My parents seemed to have aged a decade in the last 20 minutes. As the front door clicked shut behind them, the silence that filled my home was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was light. It was clean. It was the sound of liberation. The departure of my family was like a pressure valve being released. The toxic atmosphere they had dragged into our home dissipated with them, leaving behind a profound, almost jarring, quiet. Mark and I didn't speak for a long moment. We just stood in the living room, the incriminating purse still sitting on the coffee table like a monument to the battle we had just won. The air itself seemed cleaner, easier to breathe. Then, Mark turned to me, a slow, weary smile spreading across his face. So, he said, his voice soft, are you ready to pack for a sad little vacation? I burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy sound at first, but a ragged, hysterical one, born of weeks of stress and suppressed anger. But then it turned into something genuine, something full of relief and release. I have never been more ready in my entire life, I replied, wiping tears of a very different kind from my eyes. We didn't wait. The original plan had been to leave on Thursday, but the idea of spending 2 more days in the same city as them, even without contact, felt unbearable. That night, fueled by adrenaline and a giddy sense of freedom, we went online. We found 2 last-minute seats on a flight to Florence, leaving on Tuesday morning. We booked them without hesitation. We packed in a whirlwind of joyful efficiency, pulling out summer clothes and guidebooks. For the first time, the planning felt real, untainted by the shadow of family obligation. We turned on our phones' autoresponders, leaving a simple message for friends that we would be out of the country and unreachable. For my family, we left nothing but silence. Those 10 days in Italy were more than a vacation. They were a resurrection. It was as if I was seeing the world, and myself, in full color for the first time. We walked hand in hand down ancient cobblestone streets, our footsteps echoing the history around us. We ate gelato at midnight on the steps of the Duomo, the marble cool beneath us. We stood in front of Botticelli's Venus and felt a sense of awe that made all our family drama seem so small, so petty. In our Tuscan cooking class, we learned to make pasta from scratch from a cheerful nonna who didn't speak a word of English but communicated perfectly through gestures and laughter. Our hands were covered in flour, our faces flushed from the wine, and I felt a lightness in my soul I hadn't realized was missing. Crucially, we didn't talk about my family. We didn't need to. The real therapy was in the not talking, in the simple act of existing in a space where their opinions and demands had no reach. I was no longer reliable Clara, or the responsible daughter, or the gullible one. I was just Clara, an artist seeing the world, a wife celebrating her marriage, a person rediscovering her own worth. The freedom was the most intoxicating thing I had ever experienced. When our plane touched down back home, the reality we had escaped came rushing back. We turned our phones on in the taxi, and the inevitable digital onslaught began. The notifications flooded our screens. My mother had gone through a predictable cycle. First came frantic panic. Dozens of missed calls and texts like, "Clara, where are you? Please call me. I'm worried sick." This was followed by indignant anger. "How could you just disappear like this? This is an incredibly childish way to handle problems." And finally, she deployed the heavy artillery of guilt. "I hope you're happy. Diana is an absolute wreck because of you. You've torn this family apart." Diana, for her part, had sent one epic novel-length text message. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and blame-shifting, detailing her struggles and accusing me of having an easy life and kicking her when she was down. My father, characteristically, had sent nothing at all. Mark watched me as I scrolled through the messages, my face impassive. "Want me to delete them?" he asked. I took a deep breath and hit delete all myself. "No need," I said, a small, genuine smile on my face. "I've got it." The first few weeks back were a study in new beginnings. Our home was no longer just a house. It was a sanctuary. I walked into my studio and felt a surge of creative energy I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant, low-level anxiety of anticipating my family's next demand, my mind was free. The story flowed from my fingertips. Meanwhile, I began to hear whispers about Diana's world through the family grapevine. A cousin mentioned that the Napa trip had been canceled, resulting in the loss of a significant non-refundable deposit. Without a constant stream of cash from my parents, Diana's brand was faltering. Her perfect, curated life required constant investment, and the funds had dried up. She couldn't afford the new clothes, the expensive props, the weekend getaways that had become the backbone of her content. Her feed became repetitive. Her followers started to drop off. The house of cards had begun to tremble. I felt no satisfaction in this, only a distant, clinical sadness. She had built a life based on an illusion, and the illusion was beginning to fade. We had returned from our trip not just as a couple, but as architects of a new, fortified life, and the foundation was finally solid. 8 months later, the landscape of my life had been completely redrawn. The graphic novel I had poured my heart and soul into, the one I had completed in a whirlwind of post-confrontation creativity, was published. The response was something I had only dared to dream about. It received critical acclaim, with reviewers praising its emotional depth and unique artistic style. Then, the impossible happened. It hit the New York Times bestseller list. A week after that, my agent called, breathless, to tell me that a major film studio wanted to option the rights. The success was dizzying, overwhelming, and profoundly validating. My doodling, the hobby my family had so casually dismissed, had become the cornerstone of my career and our future. The financial windfall from the book deal and film option was life-altering. Mark and I made a decision that symbolized our new reality. We sold our small, beloved house and bought a property we had once considered an impossible fantasy. It was an old farmhouse on a few acres of land, an hour outside the city, complete with a converted barn that I transformed into my dream art studio. It had high ceilings, massive windows that flooded the space with natural light, and a view of rolling fields. Mark finally had the space for the sprawling garden he'd always wanted. It was our fortress of solitude and creativity, a home built not on compromise or obligation, but on the fruits of my own labor and our shared vision. Justice for my family arrived not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet, inevitable creep of consequences. Diana's influencer career had completely imploded. Without the constant cash infusions to maintain the facade of a lavish lifestyle, her content became a hollow echo of what it once was. Her followers, sensing the inauthenticity, left in droves. She and Kevin, faced with a mortgage they could no longer afford, were forced to sell their large, impressive house. I heard through my cousin that they had moved into a small, cramped apartment, the kind of place Diana would have sneered at a year ago. For the first time in her adult life, she was forced to get a real job, working as a receptionist at a dental office. The fall from grace was, by all accounts, brutal. My parents, too, were grappling with a new reality. With me no longer serving as their emergency fund and Diana no longer a source of vicarious success, they were forced to confront the precariousness of their own financial planning. They had always lived just beyond their means, assuming Diana's success or my compliance would cushion them. Now, they had to sell the family home I grew up in and downsize to a small condo in a retirement community. In a rare, bitter email, my mother lamented how they could no longer host holidays. I hadn't excommunicated them entirely. After 6 long months of complete silence, I began to answer my mother's calls. But on my terms, our conversations were short and superficial. I established ironclad boundaries. No talk of money, no complaints about Diana, no guilt trips. The first few times she tried to cross a line, I would simply say, "Mom, I'm not going to have this conversation," and hang up. It was difficult, but necessary. She was slowly learning the new rules of engagement. One afternoon, she called, and her voice was different, subdued, stripped of its usual manipulative edge. "I saw the article about your book in the paper," she said quietly. "They said it was a masterpiece. I bought a copy. I read it." "Oh," I said, genuinely surprised. "Thank you." "Clara," she began, and I could hear the telltale crackle of unshed tears in her voice. "I am so sorry. For everything. Reading your book. I saw how much we missed. We were so focused on your sister, on the noise she made, that we didn't see the incredible person you were becoming right in front of us. You were always just there, so strong and so capable, and we took you for granted. We were wrong. I was wrong." It was the apology I had thought I would never hear. It didn't magically erase decades of hurt, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of denial, a glimmer of hope that a new, more honest relationship might be possible. Our relationship began to rebuild after that, brick by painful, tentative brick. They came to visit our new home once. My father, a man humbled by his new circumstances, walked silently through my massive new studio. He ran a hand over my large drafting table and looked at the concept art pinned to the walls. "This is a real business," he said, his voice filled with a genuine awe I had never heard before. "You built all of this yourself?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I did. I even saw Diana once, at a large family gathering for a cousin's wedding. The encounter was brief and awkward. She looked tired, the polished Instagram veneer stripped away, revealing someone smaller and more uncertain. "Your book," she said, her eyes fixed on a point over my shoulder. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Diana," I replied. She took a shaky breath. I shouldn't have said those things. In my journal. I was jealous. I still am, I guess. The confession was raw and unadorned. It wasn't an apology that could fix anything, but it was honest. I knew then that we would never be close. The history between us was too fraught with pain. But maybe, just maybe, we could one day be sisters who could coexist in the same room without the poison of resentment. We had each found our own, separate peace, and perhaps that was the best we could hope for. The balance sheet my father had once spoken of had finally been settled, not with money, but with truth. Looking back on that tumultuous year, from the crushing weight of my family's expectations to the expansive freedom of my new life, I've come to understand that the most profound lesson wasn't about their betrayal of me. It was about my betrayal of myself. For decades, I had quietly accepted the role they assigned me. The dependable one, the giver, the one whose dreams were deferrable. By constantly accommodating their dysfunction, I had taught them how they were allowed to treat me. My silence was a form of consent. That final, explosive confrontation in my living room wasn't just about exposing their lies. It was about shattering the lie I had been telling myself that I needed their validation to have worth. Our anniversary trip to Italy wasn't just a vacation. It was a declaration of independence. It was me, finally, saying out loud, "My happiness matters, my marriage matters, my life, my dreams, my so-called doodling it all matters." Setting boundaries, especially with the family you love, can feel like the most unnatural act in the world. It can feel cruel, selfish, and profoundly disloyal. But I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for them, is to draw a line. You have to be willing to step back from the people you love to protect the person you are. In doing so, you give them the chance to see you clearly, not just as the role you play in their lives. True love, the kind that lasts, cannot flourish without the oxygen of mutual respect. I've learned that family is a title that must be earned, not just inherited. It's not just about sharing blood. It's about sharing values. My family is the husband who screamed in righteous anger on my behalf. It's the friends who championed my art when no one else would. It's the community we build, the one we choose, that truly sustains us. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between your own well-being and the unreasonable demands of a family member? How did you navigate it, and what did you learn from the experience? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that prioritizing your own peace isn't selfish, it's an act of survival. Thank you for listening. And remember, you deserve to take up space in your own life. You deserve to be seen.